Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Today on the podcast, my guest is Mitchell Boling. Mitch is a retired Air Force Senior Master Sergeant who spent 25 years working on fighter jets and leading the people who maintain these incredible machines. He is the author of Leadership, A View from the Middle, which is an amazing book about leadership from a completely different perspective. If you're a leader or a future leader, chances are you're right in the middle of your organization. You are not going to want to miss this episode. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world, actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to episode 10 of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Mitchell Boling, who has a really interesting background. He spent most of his career leading men and women who maintain the world's most sophisticated fighter jets. He came up through the ranks in the Air Force and retired as a Senior Master Sergeant after 25 years of service. He knows what it means to lead, specifically what it's like to lead from the middle of an organization. He is the author of Leadership, A View from the Middle. Mitch is an expert on what it takes to lead from right where you're at. And I'm so glad he could join us today. So, Mitch, welcome.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on. I'm honored.
Well, it's so good to have you. And you have a really interesting career history. 25 years in the Air Force. So tell us a little bit about your military background, your military experience.
Okay, so I joined the Air Force in 1983 as a F-16 avionics specialist. So I just wanted to learn electronics, and that's what I ended up getting into, was working on fighter aircraft. So it turned into 25 years working on the flight line all over the world, learning everything about the F-16 and all the different levels and of the organizations and the experiences. It was actually really interesting. 25 years, all different bases across the world.
So you started as an enlisted. You started off from the ground up, right? So you started as a basic enlisted, coming into the Air Force, and you moved up in your ranks, right? So typically in the military, you're promoted, after a certain amount of years in a rank. So how many ranks did you progress in your time in the Air Force?
So I came in as an airman basic, which is E1, and I finished off as an E8 senior master sergeant. But yeah, there's plenty of level ups, if you will, different ranks throughout the career. When you start out, you're a trainee, and then you get the promotion after a year or two, kind of automatic promotion as you progress in your training and stuff. Once you're in for a few more years, you start taking tests, and that includes not only tests on your how good you are in your career, but also like leadership tests. And so the guys in all branches of the military really are constantly studying leadership and getting better at their jobs, and we test each time to gain that next rank. So as you get farther along in the career, then you get more responsibilities. You start growing as a leader, that kind of thing.
So that's an interesting perspective. I'm a Navy guy, so I saw it as well. In my time in the Navy, but so as you progress in your ranks, you get more and more responsibility, as you said, and you also get more and more people that you're leading, right?
Yeah.
So when did you start asking? How long into your career before you were starting to ask to be a leader or to lead small groups of people? How quickly did that happen?
Sure. Heck, as soon as I was trained, I was already going out on jobs with another guy, teaching him how to work on the aircraft. So even at that level, as a E4, already going out and influencing people as they did their taskings and stuff like that. But once you make E5, you're an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, and then you start becoming more of a formal leader where you'll actually, lead work crews and have several people assigned to you, so 2 or 3 or 4 people, if you will. And then as you progress on, there's different not career fields, but different duty titles to go along with these ranks. And like when you get up to, let's say, E6 in the Air Force, that's a technical sergeant. This person is now, he's leading groups of 20 people, 30 people. And on the flight line, we call them the expediter. So the expediter is the one who controls all the people under him and sends them out on their tasks and jobs and stuff like that. He's the expert of the little group. And then the next rank up is a E7 master sergeant. And from there, you're part of what we call the top 3, the senior NCOs, the senior non-commissioned officers. And so those in that rank, now they're like a manager. So they'll control and lead groups of people from anywhere from like 40 to 100 people. And they're the office manager, if you will. And then the senior master sergeant, the next step up, you're more of you're in charge of groups of people. So when I was a senior working on the flight line, I was actually a production superintendent, which the production superintendent is the guy in charge of the whole flight line. Everything that goes on the flight line goes through him.
And how many people does that affect? Sure.
Like 125 people worked in our squadron, and they're all working for the same effort. And that's, turning sorties on F-16 aircraft.
Wow.
Fixing them, getting them ready for the next day, launching them off, and then fixing them again, starting the whole process again. So as a E7, E8 production superintendent, I was leading the team with 125 people or so on. So my last posting after I got done with that was I went up to what we call the wing level, where for the whole base, I was the what we call the wing avionics manager. So I was the lead avionics person for the F-16s for the whole base, and there was about 400 avionics people on our base. So that's where I top it out.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, that's one thing I like about the military is you start off leading like a one person, right? Teaching, training, showing a junior level person to next thing you know, you're leading 800 people. That's incredible. At what point in your career did you realize that you were actually a leader? Like people depended on you, and how did that affect you when you realized that, whoa, I'm actually the leader here?
Well, I tell you what, like I was saying, I've been all over the world and different bases and whatnot. And one of the places I was stationed at was in Korea. I was Osan Air Base in Korea. And when we go to Korea, we go there for 1 year at a time, and it's called a remote tour. So you're off there, without your family and whatnot. So what tends to happen is you tend to get more in tune with all your coworkers, and you become a family kind of thing. So it was while I was there on my first tour, which that was probably my 11th year in the Air Force. I was a young staff sergeant, and there was things that happened throughout that year that I was there that just really made me feel good about being a leader. Different instances, like for instance, we had a big job that was coming up, and it was going to be like a Friday night, and everybody was going to have to work all the way till Saturday. And I stood up and said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll come in this weekend and do this task and get it over with, so you guys don't have to work the whole night through. But I need volunteers to help me, because it's going to take a few people to get this tasking done. And hands shot up all around the truck, and people were wanting to follow me and go and do this task. And so when I said that, and these hands shot up all over the truck, I got this feeling like, wow, they really listened to me, and they really want to follow me with this crazy give up my weekend task, And so that's just like one little example of something that I did that it made me feel like, yeah, these guys are listening to me. They trust me, and they want to follow me into the tasking. And by the way, we all came in on the weekend, and we did the tasking, and everything was ready to go by Monday morning, and life went on. So it kind of made me feel good.
It's funny because that story's in the book. You tell that story in the book, and it's actually one of my favorite stories in the book. And you call that the follow me moment, right?
Yeah.
And I think you described it as sort of like the sergeant who stands up on the battlefield and said, "Everybody, follow me." And and this was your first chance where you actually saw that. Whoa! Everybody raised their hands. Everybody volunteered. Everybody is following me. So I love that story, because it illustrates that moment where you realize, holy cow, I'm in charge, right? People are following me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it became my telltale sign that I did something right. Like I got these shivers down my spine, like, ooh, and that kind of went on through my career. Like whenever I would do something right or say something right, it seemed right, it was received well. Then I'd get that feeling like, ooh, that's pretty cool. These guys are listening. I like it. So
you get those moments where you're like, okay, I'm in charge. I see it. I get that feeling. Neat.
Yeah.
I like that story. By the way, this book, Leadership of You from the Middle, I absolutely love this book. And I got an early copy of it. Mitch and I met before the book was actually published, so I got an advance copy, and I loved it from the minute I read it. I think it's one of the most unique leadership books that's ever been written. And the reason I say that is most books are written from a CEO's perspective, or an entrepreneur, or somebody in a very high level in an organization that's looking down and that has all the answers because they're in charge and they're the top of the organizational chart. But what I liked about this book is you talked about leadership from the middle of the organization as a senior enlisted, Air Force. As you moved up in rank in the senior enlisted positions, you were basically a middle manager, like you might be in any big corporation around the world. You were that frontline supervisor. And so I think that the way this book is written, it's really tells a compelling story of how you can lead from right where you're at. You may not be, you may not be a general, right? But you're a frontline supervisor getting the job done. So that's why I like this book. So what compelled you to write the book, and what's been the response so far since you've got it published and you've been selling it?
Well, I've always wanted to write a book. I just didn't know what kind of book I'd end up writing, and I had this person that really turned my career around. It was actually my first couple of days on that tour in Korea. And he did something that really opened my eyes to leadership. And in fact, his comments actually stayed with me for the rest of my career. And when I started thinking about writing a book, his comments and his influence on me is what provided the genesis in my mind to actually sit down and write a book. So I would sit down and think about what kind of different things have I done in my career that I think would maybe help somebody. And again, like taking the angle from the middle. It's my thought that leaders are present at every level of every organization in the world, and it's just something that I thought was important, and I wanted to get the word out, if you will. So, I thought about leadership, and there's probably about 15,000 leadership books in the world, and
yes.
It seems like the majority of them are written from like the CEO or a known academic expert or whatever. But I'm just a regular guy. The thing is, I've been there and I've lived it, and I wanted to be able to provide something that it's not really as a technical point of view, like a college textbook would be. But don't get me wrong, there's still some technical aspects to my book, but I was also thinking about making it like a storytelling thing. So these are my experiences and the lessons that I learned throughout these experiences. Because, storytelling in itself is a form of leadership communication.
It is. It is.
Plus, my thought also was to, I don't want it to be a dry, boring textbook. I want it to be entertaining as well. So that's why, I put some stories in there about flying in the backseat of the airplane and how, you almost lose consciousness and stuff like that. And just something to make it more interesting. And
Yes.
it was a fun write. I really enjoyed writing. It made me feel good. Like I was telling you before, it was very therapeutic for me to go through and write about that stuff. So,
well, that's one of the reasons I like the book too, because there's so many stories in it, and maybe because I'm an ex-military guy myself, but I just love the stories, and I love hearing. I think there's one story in the book where you guys were doing some sort of a simulation where there's an attack on a base, and you can't. You're in a leadership position, but you can't lead because you're simulated shot dead, right? I think, and then and so the guys under you have to sort of take charge and get them, and turn the aircraft around, even though you're not able to do it. I think that's one of the stories in the book, if I recall.
Yeah, that was actually one of my favorite ones. It's called Pressure, because I tell you, John, working on the flight line for 25 years is a lot of pressure. Those guys get under the gun every day to turn jets and make them work, fix them and get them flying again. And we also have to do that in wartime, and we have to be able to train for that. And so my position was I was the guy in charge of the flight line, and the people that were running the exercise, they took me out basically. And the way I put it in the book was it was the best combat nap I ever had. I just sat there and kind of snoozed for 20 minutes while chaos sort of came down on everybody. So it was very memorable. A lot of pressure.
Combat nap. I love it.
Yeah.
So one of the things you talk about in the book, which I liked and I believe in, is you talk about leading by example, and you say that really, if you can lead by example, it's one way to become a good leader. Why is leading by example so important to you in your experience?
Well, that leading by example, that's what I was kind of alluding to a little bit ago, was that's what really bloomed in my mind to write the book. The guy that I was talking about when we were in Korea, he was going to be my supervisor, and the two of us kind of arrived at the same time. And we went out there, and there was he and I and a young airman, and the three of us were tasked to go out and just sweep up a hangar or something. And so we went out there, and he was the technical sergeant, I was the staff sergeant. We went and we grabbed our brooms, and we were going to sweep, and the young airman comes up and tries to take his broom away. And he says, well, and the airman said, I'm the airman. I need to be the one doing the sweep, and you're the tech sergeant. You shouldn't be doing that. And he tugged the broom back away from the airman, and he says, how do you expect me to send you out on a job that I'm not willing to do myself first?
I love it.
And it was that right there is leading by example 101. Yes. And it just kind of stuck with me for the rest of my career.
Yes.
And so I try to do that in my daily work. And it kind of leads to, leading from the middle.
Yes.
When you're in the middle of the organization, you're not necessarily the boss. You're not the guy at the top that's going to tell people to do stuff. You have to get them to want to do stuff, because they're going to be like your coworkers or people around your level. And we really can't just tell them to go out and do that task unless we do it first. So leading by example is saying like, I'm willing to go out and do that job, so now I know that you can do the job too. And that's what I try to do in my job is I can do all the tasks that my guys can do. And so that kind of helps them to want to keep working with me also.
That is so powerful. That's so powerful. So being willing to do, not just telling people what to do, but be willing to do it as well. So not having people do things that you're not willing to do. I love that. And I love the story of the broom. And I wasn't going to ask you about it, but I was thinking about the broom story. Then you kind of led right into it. So
yeah.
One thing you said in the book, and I liked, and because I believe in this as well, is that you describe where a leader has to provide both physical and emotional support. What do you mean by that, physical and emotional support?
Well, you have to have empathy, and you have to be able to be there for your people. You know, you have to show them that you care. Emotionally, that goes right into that. You have to show them that you care. You know, I had a guy who worked for me in the Air Force who he had a personal dilemma, and he came to me and told me about it. He trusted me and told me about it, and he literally cried on my shoulder, and I felt so I was so taken back by that. Like he was literally trusting me and literally crying on my shoulder, and then trusting me with his problems, and I did my best to help him out, and it turned out okay. But, you know, so we have to be there. We have to listen to our people, and we have to be there for them in their times of need. And then, you know, sometimes it's just simple enough to where you bring donuts in for people. You know, you just bring donuts in and say, all right, you know, I care about what you guys do for us here. And I care about you personally. And I'm going to show you that by just doing something nice for you. Just it's for the team, you know, like, so physically, you got to be there for them too, you know. So you got to be there emotionally, you got to be there physically, and show them that you care.
And you even touch on this because I don't think I've ever seen this written in any other leadership book. But you also talked about eating with your people, like sharing a meal together, and how that creates the bond, creates the relationships, and right. Yeah. That I wrote a whole chapter on food. How about that in a leadership book? Huh? That's the first time in any leadership book we had a whole chapter on food. But it is really true. I mean, you build those bonds. There's something about eating together. I know at my company we do Thanksgiving and Christmas together, but our Thanksgiving meal is everybody brings something in, and we just all share. I think the company buys the meat, and then everybody else brings side dish and dessert. But we sit there and we eat a meal together. Well, we had some visitors this past Thanksgiving. We had 3 visitors from another company, and it was the day of our Thanksgiving feast. So we said, "Well, come on, join us. We're just going to eat together." And they were just amazed that we would have this kind of a meal together, and that we would just, you know, we were joking. It was a lot of fun, but they could see the deep relationships that we had with each other in the company. And I think they were really surprised. They had never seen that before in a company. So I think sharing a meal is something that people don't talk about in leadership books, but you did. And I think it's really important.
Oh yeah. You know, it's definitely important because that's how people come together.
Right.
You know, even if it's a little thing like, bring a pizza in and set it down on the table and say, I really appreciate what you guys did this week. You know, it's been a tough week. I appreciate what you do. Here, have this pizza.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
Let's grab a slice, you know.
Right. It's easy to do. And it's not that hard. Yeah. And it says a lot.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So you've been out of the Air Force for what, almost 12 years? Is that right?
Well, 12 years. Yeah.
12 years. So what's the biggest difference you've seen as you've transitioned out of the military? What's the difference from what you saw in military leadership to civilian leadership? And you don't have to get yourself in trouble, but just some general observations about civilian leadership versus military leadership.
Sure. Well, one thing about in the military, we move around so much that the people tend to turn around, like it's called turnover, like every couple, 3 years. You get a whole new crew of people. And so there's a lot of different ideas, and a lot of different changes, some good, some bad in the military. Outside of the military, you know, sometimes you work with the same people for 30 years.
Right.
And you gotta, get to know them, know that you're going to be working with them, and know that there may not be a lot of changes. So it kind of comes a little bit more of a challenge, if you will.
Right.
And then, unfortunately, you know, sometimes from a management standpoint, you know, people do get complacent and they get onto the same old thing over and over kind of thing. They get into those habits. You know, sometimes when I first started in the civilian world, I was still trying to tell people, look, this can be a better way. Let's do it this way.
Yeah.
And they're like, no.
We tried that.
Everything's fine.
Ago.
You know,
Right.
we're just going to keep doing the way we've been doing it.
That's not the way we've always done it.
Exactly. Yeah. So change is good.
Yeah.
But you don't want to change just for the sake of change, but you also should be open to it if there's some good ideas.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, people do get put in these positions for a long period of time, and they get stuck in their ways. Yep.
Yeah.
You never could get stuck in your ways in the military because you're always changing. And like every time we went on, I made 7 deployments. Every deployment we had a different, there were some people that were the same, but you'd have 20 to 30% different crew members show up. And that just changed the whole personality of the team, every time.
Oh, sure.
So yeah, you could never be complacent.
Absolutely. Yeah. I write about complacency a lot in the book too, because, especially working on airplanes, you can't get complacent about your work, because one of the things I used to tell people is, we work on multi-million-dollar aircraft that fly over our heads carrying somebody inside the airplane. We got to not be complacent about our job. We have to do things right and stuff like that.
Right. So, yeah. Someone's life is in your hands every time you're maintaining that aircraft. Yes. Yeah. Yep. So, just your opinion, why do you think there's a shortage of good leadership in business today? I mean, you mentioned it. There's 15,000 books written on leadership. So we're trying to get better as in companies and corporations. But why do you think there's a shortage?
I think there's not enough training available, like from the corporate side. From what I've seen outside of the military, it doesn't seem to be a lot of available training for regular employees.
Right.
As opposed to in the military, we would go through a formal training class about every 3 or 4 years. Like that's a week or 2 long. As we grew through our careers, we would have formal leadership training. And then also every year we would get tested on leadership specifically, so that we could advance in the ranks. And I didn't really notice that too much in the civilian world. And that's another kind of podium stomper that I try to say is, if corporations today can invest in their employees by offering leadership classes that might help them to not only help the employees to advance in their own careers, but also to help the business become more successful. Now, I know that leadership isn't for everybody. People don't necessarily they don't want it forced down their throats. But I think for those who are interested, I think it should be available. And if your company's not providing that, then I recommend you do it on your own. Go to college and take some night classes or something like that. Because it's really worthwhile to learn about leadership. And for myself, I'm no expert, but I consider myself a lifelong learner of this subject. Mm-hmm. So I'm like a sponge. I'm always trying to learn more about that.
Myself as well. And that's why I love podcasts. I call it Dashboard University, right? So I get every time I'm going into work or coming home, I'm listening to podcasts and I'm trying to learn as much as I can from experts, from people like yourself. I want to hear the stories. And when I do hear about a good book, I want to, I dive into it like your book and just sort of absorb everything because where can you get 25 years of wisdom, right? Well, you can get it right here in this book. And I think that's what's great about people like yourselves who take the time and actually write the story down so others can learn from it. So I know I've been a leader for 30 years and the reason I'm doing this podcast and I write books is because I want to help people. And I think
exactly
the same reasons. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's you asked me why I wrote the book and how I went about it. Really, when it boils right down to it, it's because I want to help people. That's it. I want people to hear my message, and hopefully it will help them in their career or in their personal life.
That's great. I love it. So, what advice would you give to new leaders? So someone that might find themselves in the middle of the organization, they have now become a leader. They've been promoted for whatever reason. And so how can they make an impact early on? How can they become an effective leader in the middle of an organization?
Yeah, one thing they need to do is listen. Active listening is a good skill.
Yes,
because you're always
believe
learning.
in this.
Yeah.
I've written about this as well. Active listening.
Yeah. So you want to learn as much as you can. I guess listen more than you talk, if you can, and then especially down in the middle of the organization, leading from the middle, like I was saying before, you have to be willing to go out there and lead by example.
Yes,
because it's difficult as somebody in the middle of the organization that's a new leader to just go out and say, all right, you're going to go out and do this job. No, you got to say, let's go out and do this job. And it's really evident, like in the military, whenever somebody transitions from an airman or a senior airman in this case to an NCO or a staff sergeant, one day they're their best buddies, and then the next day he's your supervisor.
Yes.
So you can't just start throwing your rank around and that kind of thing. You have to be genuine. You have to be authentic. And I think it's really important just to do that whole, lead by example thing. Let's go out and do this job.
Let's as us, not you who do the job. Yeah.
Yes.
So last question. So I appreciate all your insight. And I've been asking this question to all my guests. So in your opinion, what are some characteristics of a great leader? What's some characteristics of a leader that's worth following?
Boy, there's a ton of them, huh?
Well, just give us a few.
Well, you have to have energy. You have to have the energy to actually be there and show up. You have to have compassion. You have to care about the people that you're charged with leading. You have to be competent in what taskings you are charged with also. So, there's lots of traits. There's lots of traits to being a good leader. And I think if you have those, and in addition to lead from the heart, it all kind of goes into just caring, I think. If you can care more about the people that you're charged with leading, then you'll be more successful.
So caring about people, being there, being present, leading by example, as you mentioned several times, being there emotionally, physically for people. And leadership is a people business, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's my tagline, I have to say.
I know, and I love it.
No, but it's true, right? So, and I think what you talked about just there is just being there for people and being someone that cares, leading from the heart. You just said it.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Mitch. I really appreciate that. So how can people get more information about your book or connect with you?
Okay, so my book's available on Amazon. You can also buy it from my website, mbboling.com. That's a kind of a new venture for me. I started doing the website in January, and it talks about my book and provides a opportunity to purchase it. And also, I have a blog where some of my leadership thoughts are offered. And you can also find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. My Twitter is mbboling, @mbboling. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook also. The website is the one I'm most proud of right now. That's kind of a new venture for me, and I'd love it if you could go visit it.
Okay, and what I'm going to do, thank you. I will add all those links to these resources in the show notes, so you can reach out to Mitch and thank him for being on the podcast. You can ask him questions, and he's more than willing to share his ideas and his thoughts. And his website's great. I've been on it. He's also very insightful on Twitter. So, look at the show notes and follow through these links, and you're going to see some great content, especially if you're a leader and you're looking for advice on how to be a better leader. You want to listen to Mitch. He's been in the trenches. He knows what he's talking about. So, don't make the mistake and try to think you know everything. Why don't you learn from somebody who's been doing it for 25 plus years? So So leaders, no matter where you're at in the organization, I highly encourage you to pick up this book. And despite what you might think, we're all in the middle. Even as CEO of my own company, I have to answer to the board. So I'm still in the middle of the organization, even as CEO. So pick up the book and get a different perspective on leadership, one that you probably haven't read before. This is an excellent book, and learn from Mitch's experiences. And I think that, you will be a better leader if you do that. So thank you very much, Mitch. And I really appreciate all of your insight. So thank you.
Oh, and John, thank you so much for having me on. It's been an honor, and it's been fun too. But again, I thank you for everything you've done for me over the past year. We connected, it was a little over a year ago, and I really appreciate everything you've done for me. And I love your book too. I can't wait for the second one to come out.
I'm working on it. I should be working on it today, but
yeah,
I'm here with you. So, well, very good. Thank you very much. And well, that's it for today on the podcast. So if you've liked this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. So until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.